think you can just stand here and hide behind that child after everything you've done?
I didn't mean for any of it to happen. Please, I swear I never wanted this.
You took him from us.
The billionaire froze. The woman's voice trembled as she whispered a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in months. Ethan, his son's name. The one etched in stone beneath their feet. Her child stirred, a silver pendant slipping from his collar. E.H., the same one buried with Ethan. Richard's breath caught, confusion turning to disbelief. Who was this woman, and how did she know his son? In that moment, grief collided with a truth he wasn't ready to face, one that would change everything he believed about love. Race and forgiveness. This is The Billionaire and the Graveyard Secret. Welcome, story lovers. Where are you watching from? Hit the like button and drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. It was a quiet morning, the kind that seemed to echo with loss. Gray skies hung over the marble gates of Greenwood Cemetery as Richard Hale, a billionaire whose name once dominated headlines, stepped out of his sleek black car. He wasn't here as the titan of industry or the man whose wealth built cities. He was just a father, broken, hollow, and carrying flowers for a son gone too soon. The world knew him as ruthless, untouchable, a man whose fortune was built on numbers and power. But grief had stripped all that away. His mansion, once filled with laughter and guests, now stood like a museum of silence. He spent his days signing papers he didn't read, attending meetings he didn't hear. Nothing mattered anymore. Not the stock price, not the empire, not the people who bowed when he walked by. As he walked between the headstones, the smell of wet earth and faded roses clung to the air. He paused at a familiar marble headstone etched with a name that still pierced his heart. Ethan Hale, beloved son, his only child. Gone at 28. He knelt, brushing away the leaves from the base, whispering words no one could hear. "I should have been there, son," he murmured, voice breaking. "I should have listened." Then faintly he heard it, a soft sobbing nearby. At first he thought it was the wind, but when he turned he saw her, a young black woman, her clothes worn and face streaked with tears, holding a small boy wrapped in a thin blanket. She wasn't just crying, she was trembling, as if the world had finally beaten her down. Richard's instinct was to look away. Her pain felt like a trespass in his grief. Yet something about her, her eyes, the way she clutched the child, made him hesitate. He didn't know it yet, but that single glance would unravel everything he thought he knew about his son. And himself. Richard tried to focus on the gravestone, but the sound of quiet sobs kept pulling him back. The woman's voice, soft, cracked with exhaustion, cut through the stillness of the cemetery like a prayer too broken to be heard. The boy in her arms stirred, coughing weakly, and Richard's chest tightened. He hesitated before approaching. Years of living in boardrooms and marble halls had distanced him from moments like this. Yet something about the way she knelt on the cold ground beside an unmarked patch of dirt, no flowers, no name, felt unbearable to ignore. "Are you all right?" The words came awkwardly. He wasn't used to asking that. She lifted her face slowly. Beneath the weariness was a beauty dulled by hardship, eyes swollen from tears, but clear and watchful. "I'm fine," she whispered, her tone defensive, as if she'd heard that question 1,000 times from people who didn't really care. He nodded but didn't move. The child's thin fingers clutched her sleeve tighter. Richard noticed his shoes, scuffed, damp, far too small. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. He tried to offer help, a quiet, "Can I call someone for you?" But she just shook her head. Shame flickered across her face, quick, practiced. She didn't want pity. She just wanted to disappear, but then she looked past him, to Ethan's grave. Her lips trembled. "He was your son, wasn't he?" Richard's heart skipped. "You knew Ethan?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The woman didn't answer. Her gaze fell to the ground, as if debating whether to speak. The silence between them stretched, heavy with something unsaid. Finally, she nodded faintly. "I knew him," she said. "He was kind to me when no one else was. It felt impossible." Ethan had been raised in privilege, his life neatly wrapped in comfort and expectation. What could his son have had in common with a woman living on the streets? Richard studied her closely. Her clothes were torn but clean, her movements gentle, deliberate. This wasn't someone running from life. This was someone surviving it. Where did you meet him? He asked softly. She looked toward the horizon, eyes glistening. Here, she murmured. Right here near this place. He used to visit before... Her voice caught. Before the accident, the words hit like a chill. Ethan had visited this cemetery before he died? Richard had never known that. He thought his son's life was transparent, uncomplicated. But this woman's presence suggested secrets buried deeper than the grave itself. He wanted to ask more, but the boy coughed again, louder this time, drawing her attention. She rocked him gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby." Richard's throat tightened as he watched her, how fiercely she protected the child even with nothing to give. His mind whispered questions he didn't dare voice. Why was she here today? Why his son's grave? And then he noticed something, dangling from the child's small neck. A pendant. Silver, tarnished, but unmistakable. Richard's breath stopped. It was Ethan's, the same pendant he'd worn since college. The one buried with him. He stepped closer, heart pounding, the world spinning in disbelief. How could the boy have it? And why did the woman suddenly look terrified when their eyes met? Richard's pulse thundered in his ears. His eyes locked on the pendant, a small silver disc engraved with the initials E.H. He remembered fastening it around his son's neck on his graduation day. It had never left Ethan, not even in death. He had made sure of that. Where did he get that? Richard's voice trembled, harsher than he intended. The woman instinctively pulled the child closer, her body tensing as if she expected to be judged, punished, dismissed, all over again. "I didn't steal it," she whispered. "Please don't think that." Her voice cracked. The boy hid his face in her shoulder. Richard took a breath, fighting to steady his tone. "Then tell me, how does your son have my son's pendant?" She looked at him then, really looked at him. All the exhaustion, the fear, the years of silence were in that one glance. Tears welled in her eyes as her lips parted. "Because," she said, voice trembling, "he's his son." The world seemed to stop. Richard's gaze fell on the boy, the familiar curve of his nose, the dimple that mirrored Ethan's smile. It hit him like a tidal wave. "He's Ethan's?" Richard's voice was barely a whisper. The woman nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. "Ethan promised he'd come back. He said he'd take care of us. Before the accident, but he never got the chance." Richard staggered back, breath stolen. Every wall he'd built, status, pride, race, control, collapsed in an instant. His son had loved her. His son had left behind them. Dear audience, the narrator's tone softens. Where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. For a long moment, Richard couldn't speak. The world around him, the trees, the graves, the low hum of the wind, faded into a blur. All he saw was the woman clutching her child, the child who carried his son's face, his grandson. The truth was heavier than grief. It carried shame. All his life he had measured worth in wealth and lineage, in appearances polished enough for the front page. Yet here, standing before him, was living proof of how far his son had reached beyond those walls, how love had crossed the lines Richard's world never allowed. He knelt, slowly, like a man surrendering his pride. The woman flinched at first, unsure if it was pity or anger, but when he spoke, his voice was softer than it had ever been. "I should have known," he whispered. "I should have seen him for who he truly was." The boy peeked up, eyes wide and uncertain. Richard managed a trembling smile. "He's beautiful," he said quietly, "just like his father." For the first time, the woman's tears turned from sorrow to release. Years of silence cracked open into something fragile but real, understanding. When Richard stood again, the wind carried the scent of rain and roses. He looked down at Ethan's grave and realized his son's legacy wasn't the empire he'd built. It was compassion, left behind in the most unexpected place. He turned to them, voice barely a whisper. "You're not alone anymore, because sometimes redemption doesn't come from power, it comes from acceptance." Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more powerful stories. And tell us, what does forgiveness mean to you?